Health experts are renewing concerns over weight loss drugs like Ozempic, particularly because of their side effects. And their warnings come as more people use this drug, which was intended for people with conditions like diabetes, so that it could, in fact, accelerate their weight loss. Axios policy reporter Caitlin Owens joining us live now with more on the potential downsides of these weight loss drugs. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So these drugs like Ozempic, they are skyrocketing in popularity. I know I see people talking about them in social media. They're even endorsed by celebrities. So tell us about why medical experts are raising concerns now.
Well, let's start by setting the scene a little bit. So these drugs, like Ozempic is a great example, they're already on the market for diabetes. What is being investigated is whether they work and are safe as weight loss drugs. So they're in the process of doing clinical trials for that. And there's a lot of promising results. A couple of these drugs are approved for weight loss and are already on the market. So the issue that is happening now is that some regulatory agencies, particularly in Europe, they're examining side effects like suicidal ideation, self-harming thoughts. And then some experts are saying, hold up here, we don't know exactly how these drugs will impact older people, who it's more damaging if they lose muscle mass. So, these drugs do show a lot of promise as weight loss drugs, especially for people with diabetes with obesity. But we're still learning what that trade-off looks like.
Okay, so as you just mentioned, the drugs were designed for people with conditions like obesity and diabetes. But talk to me a little bit more about the importance of figuring out the impact in a healthy person, because as you mentioned, people are all different. It could work for some, but not others.
Right. And so, people who have obesity, there are a lot of other health risks associated with that. Like any other drug, these drugs do have side effects, and we would expect that. The difference is, as you were saying, if healthy people who are do not have obesity, if they start taking the drugs, that changes the risk-benefit calculus because they don't have the underlying risk of obesity. So, I think that's what's the interesting and tricky part of this conversation is as we learn more about these drugs and more clinical trial data is shared, and the FDA will eventually make more decisions in this area, who we're talking about, which patient population, that matters.
At this point, do we know much about the long-term effects of these drugs? Because they seem to be drugs that you kind of have to keep taking for an extended period of time.
Right. And that's a big question, especially cost-wise. These could end up, and it looks like they may end up being drugs that basically are, like other drugs used to treat chronic conditions, used, maybe not forever, but for a long period of time. There's signs that that weight that people lose when they stop taking the drugs, that weight comes back. And so that has big implications for just cost of the healthcare system.
All right. So you talked about what European authorities are saying. Has the FDA said anything about concerns over these drugs?
So there are two drugs that are already approved in this class of drugs that we're talking about. There are two that are already approved for weight loss. Those drugs do come with a warning about suicidal ideation and behaviors. This is an important distinction. Ozempic, another drug that's under study called Manjaro, they are already approved for diabetes, but they do not contain warnings for suicide on that approval because the FDA says the clinical trial data didn't warrant that kind of label. And another interesting thing to note is we talked about for older Americans, concerns around muscle mass as part of that weight loss. One thing to note is these seniors have not been heavily represented in clinical trials. So that's another thing that, we might just not have the level of data that is ideal to make that assessment.
All right. We expect this story to, of course, continue developing. Axios policy reporter Caitlin Owens, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.